Welcome back, and we'll now start with the first panel, which concerns COVID-19 response and recovery. In this panel, we'll have three esteemed speakers. Mr. Figueras, who has an MD, a PhD in economics, and is the director of the European Observatory on Health Systems and Policies. He's also the head of the World Health Organization European Center on Health Policy in Brussels. He'll be talking about the responses and best practices from the EU countries. We'll also have Ms. Christina Katami, who is a policy officer at the European Commission at the Directorate General for Economic and Financial Affairs. And her title of speech is Looking Towards the Next Generation, the EU's Recovery Plan. Finally, we'll have Mr. George Kolivas. He's a research fellow at the University of Geneva at the Global Studies Institute and the Center of Competences in European Studies in Sidanski. He's also the head of the Union of European Federalists, Greece, while a former advisor at the EU Directorate General for Regional and Urban Policy and the Directorate General Regio.
All right, so let's start with the first panel. The topic is the COVID-19 response of the EU and its recovery. The topic is of great significance at this day and age. There is so much to be discussed, such as the EU effect in dealing with the health crisis, the vaccines, the research and the example of EU solidarity, the EU effect in dealing with the socio-economic crisis, the EU's recovery plan, the next generation EU, and the long-term budget. There are many concerns in the development of the response and recovery. What are the lessons learned and what lies ahead? Will the response be successful? What is the role of education and the role of the youth in the recovery phase? All this will be discussed now with our esteemed speeches. So Mr. Figueras, let's start with your speech.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to join you today. And congrats, it's very impressive. It's very nice to hear Mr. Skinner's and the kind of way you framed the debate about the role of the EU. And it's so exciting to see our younger generations being behind this movement and these debates. I believe you wanted us kind of 5-10 minutes kind of introductory remarks, and then I believe then you'll be addressing some questions. So I just jotted a few ideas to begin that debate, trying to respond a bit to your questions or to your to your guidance. I mean, there are three sets of issues I'd like to raise in the next few minutes. The first is COVID-19 is just a shock. It's albeit a big one, extraordinary one, but it's a shock to our health systems and our societies. And a lot of what that shock is showing us is not surprises. We're not surprised by many of the problems we're facing. It reflects, it's a mirror that doesn't know of populisms, doesn't know of politics. It's a mirror of structural failures in our health systems, structural failures in our societies. So in that sense, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to address those. And what we've been saying, building back better. So a lot of what we're seeing, we saw during the financial crisis in different ways. We saw failures in our systems. We saw failures in the way that the EU worked together during that time. The migration crisis, two areas actually, by the way, that Greece, your country, suffered an awful lot. So a lot of what we're seeing in these failures and these problems, we saw before. We saw it now in a scandalous way, in a measured way, but gives us, again, as I said, the opportunity to build back better. So a lot of the debate these days is about this concept that I'm sure you've been reading a lot in newspapers and articles about resilience. How resilient have been our societies and our health systems to deal with COVID, and what can we learn out of that resilience? So my second point is point out some of the lessons in terms of the resilience of the systems, what are these key elements that explain that some countries have done better than others. But let's not fall, please, colleagues, in a trap of saying, this country is great, this country is not good, this country, it's one thing you need to learn, I'm sure you learn in your studies, is a critical analysis. It's something I like to transfer to you today, is the need to be nuanced, to look at the data and be cautious about the causes, the differences. Understand that COVID is a very multifactorial element. There are many aspects of those health systems and that societies that played a role with more or less success. Don't ever fall, please, into the trap of saying, oh, this country did well because A, and this country did badly because of B. So that's a kind of second important lesson. We're finishing now a major study about the 20 key strategies for resilience. Don't worry, I will not submit you to the 20 strategies, but let me highlight a couple of those, few of those that I think would be interesting for you in your studies and your thinking, in your further development. One is, it's been less the health system, but the overall political leadership. The political leadership and the political consensus between political parties in a country to row in the same direction has been fundamental. Secondly, and I'm sure you know about that already, obviously the pandemic preparedness, how much the legislation and the strategies were in place. Another key aspect related with that is, did the country have a good system of monitoring and surveillance, sort of data in place to be able to monitor what's going on? In that sense, the role of the EU in supporting member states is very important. Another aspect of structural failures I was telling you earlier is the coordination. COVID is well beyond health, as we know. It's shown good and effective coordination horizontally between ministries and vertically at the different levels of government. So the ability to coordinate has been fundamental. One very important aspect for you, young generation, is the communication. It's been fundamental in leading the response to the pandemic. It's been fundamental for the societies to pay attention to prevention, to a number of public health measures. The ability to communicate, the ability of our policy makers to communicate uncertainty, because we didn't know. Throughout the crisis, no one knew. We were all doing research, trying to understand. So this ability to explain that, and related to that, and this is what I'm pleased, if you listen to one aspect today, listen to this one, is the infodemics. And your young generation is very important, is the fake news. Our Director General, Dr. Tedros, has been leading this movement of infodemics. How do we address the information which is as, if not more harmful than the virus? And the ability to address these infodemics has made a huge difference, to contrast what you read in the web, what you read in various social media with the actual evidence. Related to that as well is how our politicians, policymakers have been able to involve civil society, the population, the debate. So again, this transparency. And of course, within this overall governance has been the whole ability, I'll say a little bit more in my third remark, this whole ability to work across borders, not only governance and coordination within the country, but the ability, and this is where we're going to talk about the role of the European Union. But the other factors, another factor that I like to highlight to younger colleagues, younger friends, is the importance of universal access. The importance of those countries that really tried very hard to make sure the vulnerable populations had access to the services, even if your system, our systems, have what we call universal access. In practice, we need to put programs for those more vulnerable populations, those refugees, those lower social classes that actually have been more affected by the crisis. So the ability of member states to increase access to prevention, access to services has been very important. But there are many others, and I don't want to go too far. There are many others around the human resources, the health workforce. It's been very important around the ability to put public health interventions in place, or the ability to quickly reorganize your hospital services, your primary care, access, linkage, coordination between services. But one is very important, and I will finish these broad lessons of what explains effective response. One I like to highlight to you with this whole idea that health systems have to always work across with other departments, ministries in a coordinated way. And this is the ability to strengthen our social services and safety nets. Please do realize that to prevent COVID, to ensure that people quarantine, to ensure that people go and take a test, a PCR test, we need at the same time to put social benefits, protection, because if your employer is going to stop paying you because you don't go to work, if you don't have a place to isolate because you live at home with a large family within a room, if you don't provide those services, what's the point of quarantine? If I'm threatened to go to get a PCR because if I'm positive, my employer is not going to continue paying me. So again, a broad lesson. COVID has been a beautiful is a wrong word. It's been a lot has been said about learning from a good crisis. This has been an abused term, by the way. But it's how do we learn from a crisis? And in that sense, COVID is leaving us lots of lessons to do things much better. But the third point I wanted to make today, which is key to your presentation, to your day, is the role of the WHO and the European Commission. I think something I want to remind you, and Mr. Skinner has been very good already going there. The European Commission, the European Union, is what the member states make of the European Commission. They have the power that the member states give the European Commission. I'm a fervent defender, of course, of the European Union. That goes without saying, but also not only as in terms of my own values and beliefs of Europe, but in terms of its ability, its effectiveness. And now what we're seeing is that member states are giving the kinds of tools for the European Commission. We call now, President von der Leyen was talking about the European Health Union. Now member states realize, this is very important for you younger colleagues, that these are public goods. These are things that go beyond subsidiarity, that cross borders. And there are many of those, not only infectious diseases. So we need to give those tools to the European Union to be able to do that, because the European Union had their hands tied in many of these areas. So we now see changes in the ECDC, in the European Centre for Disease Control. We see more powers to EMA, the European Medicines Agency. We see ERA, this new agency, the wife of Zeus, by the way, the very jealous wife of Zeus for the Greek mythology. But the European Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority has been put in place. So we see a number of tools that will allow the European Union, the European Commission, to react more effectively. And I hope member states will not withdraw, go backwards, and will continue providing this kind of support, tools, funding, like we want to hear in a minute about the Resilience and Recovery Fund. And the same applies to the WHO. WHO has been widely criticized as well, but WHO is made by member states. And the space that the WHO has for international health regulations, that has for pandemic treaties, that has for all these areas, depends on what you member states give to these organizations. I'll leave it here because I have extended too much already. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now we will move forward with Ms. Katami and her speech looking towards the next generation, the recovery plan. Ms. Katami, I yield you the floor.
Thank you very much, Aliki, and may I add my many congratulations for the exquisite organization of such an impressive day. Well done to you, to Stathis, to Elena, to Danai, to Katerina, and everyone in the school for organizing the very first Moretti School Europe Day, but also, it's been said, but I want to stress it, the very first Conference on the Future of Europe event in Athens, one of the very first in Greece, and I believe the very first organized entirely by high school students. Well done. I believe people in Brussels and across the EU have a lot to learn from you guys. Well done. And may I also add a very big thank you to both you and the Moretti School for honoring me with your kind invitation. It is a very warm feeling being back at my beloved school and talking about the future of Europe with the next generation, with you guys. I never thought this would happen so soon. And thank you very much. Speaking of the next generation, that's exactly what I want to talk to you about for my allotted time, for a very short introduction. But I remember when I was a high school student and adults would talk about the EU, I would get lost in the budgets, in the regulations, in the numbers. So I challenged myself to be a bit more millennial in my approach, and I'm going to try to explain the complex realities of the EU Recovery Plan using the Generation Z language of memes and images. So I'm going to try to share this now with you, and you tell me if it works. I don't know what you guys see. Aliki, do you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see it very well.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to start it. Perfect. So let's start with the basics. Dr. Figueres very correctly said, and I hope he is right, that COVID is a shock to our economy. It brought a public health scare and a socioeconomic nightmare of unprecedented dimensions. But it is a shock. But is there something that's looming in the distance that is not a shock, a crisis that awaits us, that we have to deal with? And I think the youth has been saying it for a very long time, that there is something that's looming and there is something that we have absolutely to solve. We must have started already. So for us to understand the extent of the climate crisis, and this is my first point, I won't show you any number. I will just show you this picture. This is the concentration of nitrogen dioxide across Eastern China before the lockdown and after the lockdown. So that's 1 month of difference. And I want you to see what a month of economic standstill can do to the cleaning of the atmosphere. Do you see the orange points in the second picture? Not really, because there's not that much concentration of nitrogen dioxide across Eastern China in February 2020. And that's the impressive thing with COVID and what it has shown us. Actually, in the second half of 2020, I have to tell you that we saw the largest decrease in CO2 emissions in history, not just in this decade, but in the history of recorded emissions ever. And I have news for you. Scientists, especially at the UN Environmental Programme, have said that to meet the Paris goal of keeping temperature increases less than 1.5 degrees Celsius, global emissions must fall by the same amounts that COVID brought every single year from 2020 to 2030. So to fix the climate change, the UN Environmental Programme essentially says that we need a lockdown every single year until 2030. And this is for you to understand the climate emergency and where we are at now. So that's what COVID has shown us. This is the first lesson that I take from COVID. It has shown us louder than ever and louder than any policymaker and any youth activist, the climate emergency. What's another thing that COVID has taught us? And I think you guys know this the best. You started going to school on Microsoft Teams. The rest of the economy started teleworking. And all drinks were replaced by Zoom aperos, which is the worst thing ever, and I don't wish it on anyone. This is all summarized in one picture, showing the insane exponential increase of Zoom meetings within 1 month of the lockdown last year. So COVID also shows us the silver lining of the entire crisis, the power of the digital, and the need to take digitalization one step further, including advances in data protection regulations, infrastructure and technology potential, like, for example, the 5G. And I believe there's a dedicated panel later on in the day that will precisely talk about this. And crucially, investment in digital skills. So lesson number 2, digital. We have green, we have digital emergencies that are arising. What else did COVID teach us? We always say that the pandemic has no boundaries, and that is very correct. But its effects do have boundaries. The socioeconomic effects of the pandemic and its lockdown have been unequally spread across income distribution, across gender, and across age. The pandemic's burden has been borne by the society's most vulnerable, by the society's low-paid workers, atypical workers, so self-employed workers, let's say, that were not protected, by women who have traditionally been more associated with sectors that were hit the hardest, such as the retail sector, such as the accommodation services like hotels and restaurants, but also young people, you guys. The latter have been consistently facing twice or higher the unemployment rate of the general population. And it is the youth that is facing the second once-in-a-lifetime experience of an economic downturn. And I have to say this is especially true in our home country of Greece. So COVID showed us also that any future policy must include just and fair measures of socioeconomic cohesion. Anything we do, particularly in deep and structural transformations, like the green and digital revolutions, lessons 1 and 2, has to have this fairness principle in mind. So lesson number 3 of COVID, social is important. Social cohesion is important, and not everyone pays the same burden, and not everyone pays the same price. And we always have to take this into account. There is another lesson, a final one, that COVID has shown us. All around the world, governments right now are rushing to support the economy, and rightfully so. It is estimated that in the next couple of years, governments around the world will spend around 10 trillion euros for recovery efforts. The European Commission alone will issue 900 billion in debt. And this is a historic number and a historic development for the Commission and the EU to be able to do that. But at the same time, most of those will have to be repaid by 2058. You guys at 2058 will be in your late 40s, early 50s. So you will be the active population that will have to pay the taxes to pay this back. So who are the governments borrowing against? The governments are borrowing against right now the future and the next generation. That's you guys. It is those generations that if we don't fight climate change now, they will have to pay for its catastrophic consequences, for its financial burdens, on top of the accumulated debt that we are giving them now. So COVID teaches us the principle of intergenerational fairness. We are borrowing money from the future, we are borrowing money from you guys to get out of the crisis. And the least we can do is to actually use it to invest in the future, in you guys, in a green, digital, and resilient generation. You're wondering, why am I saying all of those things? Why am I saying those 4 lessons? The green, the digital, the social cohesion, the intergenerational fairness. It's because this is exactly, in my view, what the EU recovery plan tries to do. This is exactly the points that are in the heart of Next Generation EU. And that's why the name of the recovery plan is Next Generation EU, because it's supposed to be investing in you guys. As Dr. Figueroa said, it's supposed to be building back better. And for you to understand a bit exactly how the Next Generation EU program works, we heard it also from the Vice President. This is an unprecedented amount in size. Next Generation EU amounts to 750 billion euros. And for you to understand how much this is, imagine that you get €1 for every second of every day for the next 24,000 years. And that's exactly what 750 billion is. And this is not the entire plan. This is the half of the plan. I promised no packed slides, but you will allow me one, very ugly, to show you exactly how the recovery plan is structured. You see that the main instrument of Next Generation EU, the 750 billion we're talking about, is enveloped in what we call the multi-annual financial framework. So that's just a fancy word of saying the EU's long-term budget, which amounts to 1 trillion. So altogether, this is a huge package and a huge opportunity for us to invest better in the future, to invest in green, to invest in digital, to invest in socioeconomic cohesion, and to, for once, invest in the future and not in debt. I know that my time is almost up, and I know this slide is very ugly, so maybe I'm gonna leave it here, and then in the discussion we can talk about how exactly the Next Generation EU works in practice, how exactly the Recovery and Resilience Facility works, and what are the mechanisms to ensure that we have climate and digital transformations. We can also talk, if you wish, about Greece 2.0, which is the Greek Recovery and Resilience Plan. And all in all, we can talk about anything you wish in the discussion. But I wish this was a good introduction for you guys to understand the complex but inspiring and very, very historic world of the Next Generation EU. I really look forward to discussing with all of you, and I wish you all the best for the event going forward.
Thank you, Ms. Katami. It was an extraordinary speech, and we will discuss later about it in the discussion. So now let's move forward with the last speech of this panel, Mr. Kolivas, and his speech, The Globalization Crisis and the Future of the Euro Era. Ms. Kolivas, we give you the floor.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this nice event organized by the High School Moretis. And I wish you the best for your future, and I encourage you to keep on being interested in Europe and the European integration process. I want to talk to you about, first of all, I want to compliment my colleagues that have spoken just before me. And I want to talk about the globalization backlash of the last decade and the new multipolar planet dominated by the Thucydides trap, that is the competition between the established power, the USA, and the rising power, China, and how the European Union would better respond to that challenge. We know that after the financial crisis of 2008-2009, the globalization backlash gained momentum both in the USA and in Europe. The Eurozone crisis that followed and the migration crisis in 2015 that happened in Europe have further intensified the globalization backlash in the European Union. They have even provoked a certain anti-European movement in several member states of the Union, translated into facts by the Brexit referendum in the United Kingdom that took place in 2016. The Trump administration in the USA has been partly a result of the globalization backlash, but the oversimplified language and responses to multidimensional challenges that have been given by the President Trump himself and his administration, I think that in the end have harmed both the USA and the Western world globally, including the European Union. But today, what is certain is that the destabilization of the multilateral world order established by the USA and the United Kingdom after the World War II is a reality. A new world order, or disorder if you wish, is emerging, dominated by the growing competition between the USA and China and the Thucydides trap linked to this competition. In this new world order proposed by the Biden administration, Japan, USA, Canada, Japan, Australia, and India are invited to form an alliance against the Chinese expansion. The European Union will be sooner or later formally invited by the USA to join this anti-China alliance. So the European Union will have to respond, will have to make a choice. But in all cases, the free trade, which has been the basis of a thriving globalized economy in the last decades, will face serious problems. In this context, Germany's reliance on its gigantic trade surpluses with the USA and China risk to become a factor of potential destabilization, both of the German economy and of the EU economy. So, in very simplified terms, what would be the right response of the European Union and the euro area to these challenges? The response would be to consolidate and complete the economic and monetary union, the euro area. And the response has started to be given by the Next Generation EU Fund, about which Christina has just talked to us. The Next Generation EU Fund shows the way, paves the way and shows the way ahead. Now, to complete the economic and European Union, we have reports and roadmaps. I will try to speak only about 3 minutes presenting the highlights, but the substance in all this exercise is to establish or to consolidate trust and cooperation between North and South of the euro area. This is a key issue because North is a creditor in the euro area system, and the South is globally a debtor in the euro area system. So if there is no trust, consolidated trust between them, the future cannot be brilliant. So how would this trust be consolidated in the best possible way? By succeeding in implementing successfully, timely, with good quality, the Next Generation EU program. This is the best way to succeed in this respect too. Now, certainly the conference of the future of Europe needs to address how the euro area governance should be refitted to limit the problem of democratic legitimacy, the austerity issue, the debt problem, the accumulated debt problem, and last but not least, the government issue and the trust challenges. To give you some highlights of what the reports and roadmaps says about the completion of the euro area. First, we need a review of the Stability and Growth Pact to update it to the current circumstances. Everything has changed compared to the 19th, where this Stability and Growth Pact has been conceived. We need to complete the banking union now and not in some day, including the joint deposit insurance scheme for deposits up to 100,000 euro. We need to complete the capital markets union to allow investment to be optimized through the allocation the capital market union will make across the euro area. And this needs to happen, I mean the capital market union, to allow also the private sector assume a significant part of the local risks in the euro area. We need the fiscal union. We need a Eurozone budget for stabilization, structural reforms, investment, convergence. We need Eurobonds, a European safe asset. And regarding all these issues, the Next Generation EU is, as I said, showing the way, is paving the way. There are many who already say the Next Generation EU should become permanent in the long term and should be combined successfully with, because you know that the Next Generation EU concerns the entire EU, it should be combined successfully and complement a euro area budget. We need a taxation union. The economic and monetary union cannot be completed by keeping EU tax havens within the euro area. We need the economic union, that is convergence of competitiveness, productivity, including a grid of minimum wage appropriate for each member state. We need a European social dialogue in this respect. We need a joint unemployment reinsurance scheme, and we need upgrading skills jointly. We need institutional reforms to reduce substantially the democratic deficit and to consolidate the democratic legitimacy of the euro area. We need to bring Eurogroup in the EU legal and institutional framework. We need also to bring the ESM, the European Stability Mechanism, within the European Union legal and institutional framework. And these two things do not happen today. These two institutions have their own independent multi-government institutional and operating system and framework. We need a European Minister of Finance to coordinate the economic and monetary union. And of course, we need to give to the European Parliament in its Eurozone composition its full involvement in the governance system of the euro area. We need to reinforce the international role of the euro. We do not need the euro to compete the dollar, but we need to consolidate its role. And of course, we need to use it in all the European transactions. It's a little bit ridiculous that today in transactions within the euro area and the European Union, in many cases, they still use the dollar. So just to tell you that for most of these highlights that I have given you, the European Commission has submitted moderate proposals, not very going too far, moderate proposals since the end of 2017 or even earlier. But most of these proposals have been put in the archives of the Eurogroup. So the Convention on the Future of Europe is a unique opportunity to update all these proposals, to consolidate them, to extend them, and to put a new agenda for the completion and the consolidation of the euro area, which is the only possible reply of the euro area and the European Union to these new challenges of a new globalized world, which I have in summary stated to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kolivas. And now we shall move to the discussion. Now, first of all, Mr. Figueiras, you discussed how the COVID-19 pandemic provided us the opportunity to understand better the EU's structural failures. How, though, can we improve the lack of coordination you mentioned, and can we, the youth, contribute to a better working European mechanism?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. I enjoyed very much, if I may use those first names, Christina and George, your presentations. And again, it's beautiful the way that you brought us together, because in many ways, if I may comment on theirs, Christina, you're right. I mean, it's just a shock of the many shocks coming. That's the point that you made so beautifully well, that this is a unique opportunity to go for the next ones, which are larger and bigger, actually. So are we going to take advantage of that? And then George reminded us about the social politics, the geopolitics, sorry, reminded us about the democratic deficit, the trust, the economics. So this is where I think the three of us want to bring you, colleagues, friends. We want to bring you to understand this broader politics and economics, this trust. That's what's going to make a difference. If we're going to beat COVID, which we will, but the next much larger crisis looming in the horizon. On the question of the European Union, I'm optimistic. I may be the only one left here, not here, I mean around, but I am optimistic. I think COVID is teaching us a very, very powerful lesson that either we work together, either we find the mechanisms or we sing together. So, and I think our president, she's a good leader. I think the president of the union is a good leader to von der Leyen, and is put forward a series of very ambitious strategies for that kind of coordination you're talking about. I was mentioning them earlier very quickly. We're talking about, I was saying, the ECDC, European Centre of Disease Control. This is a center that had very little power now, just risk assessment. Now we're talking about giving it risk management. We're talking about information systems that allow us immediately to have immediate information about future pandemics, future threats to our health. So that's one element. There's another one that let me highlight, which is looming there. Some of our groups have been studying that, is the antimicrobial resistance. We know there are a number of bacteria. I don't know how much you've been dealing with that in your school and so on. Probably not. It's not part of the curriculum. But you know that there are a number of bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. And there are huge differences. Actually, in that sense, Greece is not doing very well in the amount of prescriptions of antibiotics we give in our member states, the way we use them, how effectively we use them. So there's a really looming threat about some of these bacteria starting to spread and not having antibiotics to deal with it. That's another crisis is looming there. So going back to my point, the ECDC, the stronger role for the EC will make a difference. ERA, this new agency, which is very much following the BARDA, the agency in the US, can make also a difference in terms of preparedness, in terms of the ability to produce vaccines, in terms of the ability to have a number of preventive measures, in terms of having ventilators, in terms of having masks. So I believe that member states will actually come together to give additional powers and funds. We heard from Christina about the recovery fund. A lot of it, Christina, as you know, hopefully will go to the strengthening of our health systems. We are lobbying very hard from the health side to try to get some of your money there. But I want to go further, and this is where you're asking me about the younger population. We need the debate about the European Health Union to be there with you, in the communities. We haven't been doing well enough to get the debate with the youth population about our citizenship, because it's not just working together for the pandemics. We need to much work together on terms of patients crossing borders, in terms of training doctors and nurses across Europe, in terms of accessing to some technologies. So there's much more in that European Health Union that I hope we can put forward. George was talking about having some economic powers. We're talking about solidarity. We're talking about patient rights that the European Union should be able to protect. So I hope that beyond, which I think is a must now, to have a good coordination for pandemic preparedness for future pandemics, which is now von der Leyen is strengthening. I think she's going to be successful. We need to be much more ambitious, and that's where we need you. We need you to bring that ambition on the road, to be advocates of that ambition, to really, and make the European Union accountable. We do want accountability. It's part of the whole thing. Accountability, transparency, more control, but more space and more ambition. And I think the horizon, potentially, it's very large. I mean, the kinds of things that Christina was talking about, the digital Europe, the environmental Europe, the greener Europe, either we do that together or we sunk together. if we are not able to, as a bloc, to work together in the current geopolitics that George is presenting so well, we are dead. So it's a very serious issue we have ahead of us, and we do need you desperately. The older generation have been a total failure, I must say. So if you guys don't rescue us, not only with the money, not only with your salaries, it's horrible, it's terrible. But Christina, you're absolutely right, Christina. I keep forgetting that we are, we're bailing ourselves with these poor people's money, So not only we need your money, your future money, we need you to save us, all of us, So there you are. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Now, Christina, the pandemic's burden has fallen to the society's most vulnerable members. How has the new EU recovery plan taken this group into account? And if yes, how will it strengthen their position long term?
Liki, thanks. This is a super question, and I think everyone should be asking that. May I also add, Joseph, I completely agree to everything you said. I think this should be written, and it should be given to all high school students to learn in their education, I completely agree with all your points made, and also George, with all your points made on what we have to do and what we have to advance still, and what the Conference of Europe is actually here about to talk to us about. So thanks to both my co-panelists for the excellent points made. I really hope the young generation will take a lot out of this panel. To your question, Aliki, absolutely. And I think this is one of the very core things that the Next Generation EU plan tries to do. Let me give you a very concrete example that actually happened before Next Generation EU was a reality. Back in 2019, when our president, Ursula von der Leyen, announced to the beginning of the Green Deal, a core component of the Green Deal was what we call the Just Transition Mechanism. And that happened already December 2019, where no one really knew what COVID was at all. What does this Just Transition Mechanism try to do? As I told you before, when we have a transformation ahead of us, that's something like the green transformation, that is a very deep and structural transformation of our entire lives. It's not just putting a windmill here and putting a solar panel on our houses. It's changing our lives completely. And there are some areas and there are some people that are going to have to pay the price of this transition. Especially, for example, imagine if you're a coal miner now. The coal mines need to close. Imagine if you are a lignite producer in a lignitis unit in Greece, and all units of lignite production have to be closed, not by 2028 that the government had initially said, but by 2025. This is in 4 years. So in 4 years, we have to close all units of lignite production in northern Greece. Can you imagine what this means for the people who work in those units, for the people whose salaries depend on this work, for the people that live there? This is a huge, huge transformation. And that's exactly what the Just Transition Plan aims to do. It aims to compensate for this huge transformation change. It aims to reskill and upskill and take those people and allocate them where the economy needs to go, where the future of the economy lies. So your question that what the pandemic effects, the worst effects have been borne by the most vulnerable, is true also in the green transformation and in everything that we do. And the Commission's response has been at its core from the very beginning. May I just add, I was looking at the Biden climate plan the other day, and I have to say it's a copy-paste of the European Green Deal. And you'd be surprised that also this transition idea is what the Americans have taken and what they have learned from the Europeans as well. So you have this Just Transition Fund that exists as part of the plan, as part of the entire plan, as part of the recovery plan. But at the same time, you have a lot of measures, and in particular, a lot of education measures, a lot of reskilling and upskilling measures, a lot of employment protection measures that aim to do precisely that, to protect the people that are most vulnerable in our societies now and create a higher, better, and stronger social welfare state for the EU going forward. I don't know if that answers your question. If you have any follow-up, we can discuss this more, but I don't want to take any more of your time, so I'll stop it here and back to you.
Thank you very much, Christina. Now, Mr. Kolivas, on the issue of globalization that you talked about and how COVID has impacted that, do we want a stronger international role of the euro? Should we be pursuing the dollar's position?
Yes, we want a stronger euro role. That's sure. As I said, we need certainly to use the euro in the transactions within the European Union and between the European Union and its major trade partners. We don't want to compete with the dollar. We don't want to replace the dollar. This would really be a risk for the European Union as a whole. We want to complement the dollar as a pillar of stability in the international monetary and financial system. Because let's not forget that the 2008 and 2009 crisis, financial and economic, was due to this uncontrolled first position, dominant position of the dollar in the international monetary and financial system. So we want the euro to have a much more important international role, but we don't want to replace the dollar.
Yes, thank you very much. Now a question for all, and this is open for anyone to chip in and contribute to the discussion. Is the EU COVID-19 response effective in comparison with other global actors?
Any colleague wants to chip in?
Joseph, I think this is for you.
All right.
I can talk about recovery responses.
Thank you, Christina. Very kind of you. Yes and no. I think it is actually. I think there are many aspects that within we have to differentiate. First of all, the individual member states' response, which you cannot say there is one European response. I think there are many European responses, member states, and it would be interesting to thresh those out and see the pros and cons of the different countries. And then to differentiate that with the EU itself, with the European Commission work. Again, as I said at the very beginning of my remarks, I think that within the constraints, within the legal space that we given to the Commission, to the European Union structures and legislation, I think we've been pretty successful. Of course, there's a lot of criticism as to the procurement of the vaccines and where that could have been done better. Yeah, I take the point. However, I do think that it's been successful. I think had not purchased together, procure vaccines together, some of our more vulnerable member states would have had a really, really hard time. So this core element of solidarity, the way that we managed to distribute the vaccines pretty effectively, I think is a winner. I think is very good. The same way, yes, at the beginning we had the knee-jerk reaction, closing boundaries, starting to purchase prevention equipment, separately, but quickly I think there was some homogeneous sort of agreement between the member states. There are still issues around sort of traveling restrictions. There are issues around the use of some prevention, as I said already several times, like use of masks or social distancing. And there are huge differences between the member states. One would dream to have a bit more convergence, a bit more agreement, a bit more coherence on those things. But again, that's very complex. And I think compared with any other regions of the world, we've been far more successful. Of course, there are no equivalents. of the European Union elsewhere, while they are lighter sort of geographical regional organizations. So all in all, I think we've been pretty successful. However, I do hope that next time round, and it's not if, but when, will be even more successful, and we would have learned the lessons.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And may I just add to this, while you were talking, Joseph, I was thinking, I think the COVID response is the typical EU response. Slow start, but amazing development. And I think we saw this in the vaccines. I think we saw this in everything that we try to do together, in the travel restrictions. I think we've seen this everywhere. And this is really the lesson that the EU must be taking. And this is why we should be talking about this at the Conference on the Future of Europe. Why is there always a slow start? What can we do to change it? What can the young generation tell us to change it? And to conclude, I do have to say, though, I am very, very proud of the EU's recovery plan. Compared to all the recovery plans that I've seen in the world, I find no comparable. I find no comparable in terms of what we have been saying, in terms of a green recovery, in terms of a digital transformation, in terms of taking into account what we need to invest in the future for. And this is where the EU has really been successful. And yeah, that's my conclusion.
Yes, thank you, Christina, for your contribution. Now, back to the
complement to this question.
Yeah, sure. Yes.
What I keep from what Josep and Christina have said, in my view, the most important point is that there is no alternative than the European Union working together to address such challenges, because these are not national challenges, and seeking ways to work better together is a necessity. Now, regarding the recovery plan in respect of the economy, I see in the press in the last weeks some comparisons that the USA, the Biden administration in particular, has accumulated packages of $6 trillion, the Job Act and the Environment Act and this and that and the Central Bank, and the European Union has only 750 billion euro. And that's not enough to catch up the USA and to win our future. I want to say in respect of such kind of analysis that I don't think it's right. First, the package the European Union has adopted globally, including the European Central Bank, to face the pandemic crisis, is much more than 750 billion. It goes up to 4 trillion, or between 4 and 5 trillion. So even in figures, it is comparable to the USA plans and whole package. But I think that the real challenge does not lie in figures. If you sum up more trillions, you will not have the right replies. The challenge lies in what, and the response to these challenges lies really in what Josep and Christina have said. Digital transformation, the green transformation, social cohesion, and skills, and a real Europe for health and mobility in safe conditions. There is the challenge, and the good use of the funds, the successful use of the funds in as soon as possible is the real challenge. If we add 1 more trillion, it will not make a difference. The amounts of money at stake are huge, and let's go in working hard to use them effectively and to succeed in these transitions. And just a reminder, Christina said that the transition of the lignite production areas or coal mining, etc. But in Germany, the car industry of Germany, which has been dominating the planet in the last decades, is now facing huge challenges because their competitor are not Toyota or General Motors. Their competitor are Apple computers or Google, because the next mobility tools will be automated, and their main component will be software. So the transition, the digital transition and the green transition is a story for all of us, not only for coal mining regions. That's all for the moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your contribution. Well, yes, we talked about cooperation and what Mr. Kolibasro now asked. Yes, this is part of globalization. And the recovery plan is affected by globalization. So on that matter, what has the COVID-19 crisis taught us about globalization? And what, in your view, all of your view, will be the future phase of globalization? Mr. Christina, do you want to start?
I'll start. Thank you, Aliki. What didn't COVID teach us about globalization? I think what it did was teach us how unsustainable our models were and how things can go bad really quickly. I think that's what we learned about globalization. I think we learned that globalization needs to be sustainable. It needs to have sustainable value chains. It needs to have diversified value chains. For Europe, I have to say, we're talking, okay, I'm sorry, I'm bringing back the green transition point, but I think this is super important. We're talking about the green transition, the green transformation. Do you know where we take our raw materials from to create windmills and to create solar panels and everything? We take them for countries such as China, who don't have environmental rules and measures like we do. And this is a problem of globalization. Europe can decrease its emissions and Europe can be green. But if the rest of the world doesn't follow, then we're not really solving the crisis. And that's an example, I think, of where globalization allows you to find little windows of opportunities to trick the problem. And COVID showed this once again. So in my view, what I take from the COVID crisis is that current globalization models cannot continue to exist. We have to find more sustainable ones, more sustainable patterns, and we have to find a way to make globalization work for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's right, Christina. That's absolutely right. From the health perspective, there are several commissions. Actually, there's an overpopulation of international commissions now. I'm in the secretariat of one of those, the Monti Commission, led by former President Monti of Italy and Commissioner of the European Union. But there are many others. Our Director General has just finished one of those, the independent panel for the preparedness response, and there are some others, and they're all of those commissions have come up with a series of recommendations aimed at prime ministers, aimed at the very high level, including ours, the Monti Commission, around a series of international governance arrangements. In our field, for instance, we're talking about the pandemic treaty, we're talking about the Global Threats Council, we're talking about a public goods board for the G20. And let me spend a couple of minutes there for our younger generation here today. I don't know how much you know economics and so on, but this concept of public goods that we understood well for the environment, because the environment we share, now is becoming quite clear as well with the health threats as well, and going beyond the viruses, but going other health threats that are there as well, like economic crisis affects our economies, but affects health. The refugee crisis as well. So realizing that there are many of these basic concepts of public goods that, I don't know what you've done at the school, of this idea of externalities, that is, is something you have to do together, because we share these threats. So we are realizing that it's not just and I hope now it's going to be enough work on the environment, but the health threats, there are many others. And as I said, there are now a range of governance, international governance suggestions that have been put in place now, and I hope some of those will be put in place. When I interrupted my list, my shopping list, I was talking about the G20 Public Goods Board, which started with the financial crisis. There was a board following the financial crisis, and then there is the green, of course, the green bonds, the public good, the green environment as a public good, and we hope now as well that we can talk about the health as a public good, as something that the G20 has to put funding together. The IMF as well. We're talking about ways in which the loans to member states are linked to commitments on the Green Deal, commitments on health, commitments on this concept of One Health. One Health, we mean that the pandemic has shown us that it's not just health system, it's the environment, it's the animal health, it's the agriculture, it's the use of antibiotics. And how do we get these huge, powerful instruments that George is talking about to put funds, to put governance arrangements, accountability arrangements for us to address that together. So I hope this time is going to make a difference. I hope that, because we wasted other crises. I think we wasted the financial crisis. To me, Christina, George, to me, the financial crisis is an element of public good. We are in the same boat once again. It's not just germs that cross boundaries or the environmental threats that cross boundaries. The economy crosses boundaries. And I think we wasted that crisis to have some strong global governance arrangements. I hope that now with the fluster, with a number of commissions have been put in place to address that, I hope we'll convince our prime ministers, I hope we'll convince our countries, our member states across the globe to work together and address this globalization together.
Yes, of course. Let's hope that this will happen, Josep. And we have two major trends in the global scheme today. A little bit contradictory, but that's the reality. That's, in one hand, we need coordination and cooperation at the international level, because the pandemic is not local, is global. The environment problem and challenge and the climate challenge is not local, is global, as Josep and Christina have so well demonstrated. So we need global cooperation, reinforced and more efficient. On the other hand, the shape of the future world will be dominated by big regional powers competing peacefully, hopefully, between them. We know the USA is the dominant, the established power today. We know China is the rising power. We know the opposition between them. We know the risk of a Thucydides trap coming from the Greek historian and general Thucydides, who first wrote about this trap between Athens and Sparta, which led to the war between Athens and Sparta, which destroyed the classic world and the civilization of Athens. Let's hope we will escape all that, and we wish to do that. But the truth is that Europe, if it is not consolidated, as I have explained very briefly, and the euro area, if it is not consolidated, not only in economic terms, but with respect to all the fields that Vice President Skinas has explained in his opening keynote speech, we will be losers as Europeans in this new globalized world. So the only realistic response for us in the context of international cooperation to be efficient is to be strong. United, we are strong. Divided, we are losers.
Thank you very much. We can truly keep talking about this all day, but we have to move on with the other panels. So we will now make a short break, but stay with us for the next panel of EU and the environment. And thank you very much, Mr. Kolivas, Ms. Katami, and Mr. Figueras for the wonderful discussion. And please stay with us for the next panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aliki, for the great moderation. Well done.
Indeed. Congratulations.